what of the Israeli Supreme Court? And I have not checked on this recently. Was supposed to make a ruling about the ultra-Orthodox in Israel as to whether they needed to participate in the mandatory draft, essentially that has always existed in Israel.
Right.
Everybody at age 18 goes into the military. I think for at least a year or two, and except for the ultra-Orthodox. And there's a couple of members of Netanyahu's coalition, I think Shah's, and I can't remember the second, that said that they, the Torah, I can't remember.
United Torah, I forget.
Something with the Torah.
Yeah.
It's big there.
It's which apparently is very popular in Israel. That they were encouraging Netanyahu also to accept the peace deal. I mean, they're out in front of the Biden administration and acknowledging that Netanyahu is stonewalling this. But is there any connection there? Like, do we know? Are they worried that their sort of constituency is going to be like, hey, wait a second, why are we going into the military? We're supposed to be, this is when I'm supposed to be reading
we're just
the
stealing
Talmud
land.
right
We're
now.
not going to fight for it, though.
No, I mean, I asked a few Israeli colleagues about this, and I got variations of not really and always possible. I mean, this has been a long simmering issue like this, and again, this agreement with the government and the ultra-Orthodox parties goes back to the founding of the state and these kind of special concessions that were made to kind of consolidate, the project early on. But obviously, this community has grown considerably. They continue to be subsidized to hang out and study the Torah and have lots of kids, and a lot of working, tax-paying Israelis don't think that's fair, and they're quite right about that. But yeah, my understanding is it's not a huge part of Netanyahu's. Never discount that. I mean,
right. I mean, it's just probably. I think between the two of them, they may have like maybe not even 10 or 12 seats in the Knesset, but that. There's not a huge margin of error in the Knesset for Netanyahu.
Right, there isn't. But again, give him his due credit. This is a guy who knows how to stick around.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, the timing, that brings us to the timing of this hostage rescue, I think, where 4 hostages rescued, maybe some were killed over the weekend. We don't have independent verification on that. It's what Hamas is claiming. And then 270 Palestinians slaughtered in this hostage rescue. At minimum, hundreds more wounded. The reports were apocalyptic. Children's body parts in the streets, dogs eating the decaying bodies of people. Now, we know that the bulk of the hostages were released during the temporary ceasefire. But 4 were rescued here, and this is, I'm sure, something that Netanyahu's government sees as a massive victory. What is the timing of this? Was this meant to demonstrate that the war needs to continue for the return of hostages? And do you feel that the timing was in order to take some pressure off of Netanyahu on the ceasefire?
I mean, I think you have to assume that partly, but I also think part of it is, I would imagine they got intelligence of where the hostages were, and it was an opportunity to go in and get them. Obviously, the costs of this rescue are enormous, and it's frankly disgusting to see U.S. officials out there, praising this as a successful operation. Of course, I'm glad that the hostages are out, but 270 people killed and as many, hundreds wounded is extraordinary.
And reports that it was potentially an aid vehicle that came in. Now, I don't know. This is unverified. And there's also, at the very least, there's footage out there of an Israeli, I think it's a Chinook helicopter, landing at the pier or taking off from the pier. Now, it's unclear what was going on there. I don't know if they were that was one of the hostages that was being evacuated. I mean, we have no idea. But
there's a lot out there.
It's reminiscent of what happened in the wake of the CIA using vaccination programs as a way of getting at, I think it was bin Laden or whatnot. You had, I mean, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who forego vaccinations because they thought it was all
plot. And that endangers relief operations everywhere in the world. And again, just today, I mean, because this, again, I don't know, I've seen some of the rumors out there about the helicopter
None of this
and
is
the
verified.
pier, but We do know that this operation took place in the deconflicted humanitarian zone around that pier. Again, let's acknowledge.
And Cindy McCain's organization.
World Food Program, that's what I was going with this. Is like they've announced that they are now pulling out or at least suspending operations again because this endangers their work. This is supposed to be an area that is safe for humanitarian operations. And again, we have to recognize Hamas being present there, holding hostages there, also a war crime. That of course does not cancel out Israel's own responsibilities. It never does.
There's a story in NBC News today that the Biden administration has discussed potentially, I mean, there's like 4 qualifiers for this, right? Like discussed potentially negotiating a unilateral deal with Hamas. So they've discussed the potential for a potential solution with Hamas. Do you think that's real, or is that just another sort of lame like attempt by the Biden administration? And this would be just for the American hostages. And this, of course, this again would be something that you could imagine the Biden administration thing would put a lot of domestic pressure on Netanyahu because if the U.S. can get their hostages back, why can't Israel?
That's right.
But do you think it's real, or is it just we're just going to float this?
I would hope that they've been talking about this via Qatar from the very beginning. I would wish. I mean, how many times have we sent like CIA Director Bill Burns over there, a very capable diplomat, to do these rounds of talks? So I would expect this has been raised in some aspect. I don't know this for sure, but I think the fact that they're kind of leaking it out there is another attempt to kind of, put pressure on Netanyahu just at the possibility that this could happen.
I mean, as if Netanyahu's not aware that there's a possibility that this could happen. And he's like, well, now they're leaking it as a potential. So I probably only have like another 18 months.
Right. No, exactly. And let's also remember, like, in terms of like threats and pressure, we had the so-called Rafah red line, which was apparently very, very serious. And that operation went forward and we folded. Biden folded.
Totally.
So why would you think these kinds of threats and pressure would work unless you're actually willing to move forward with real
do one of them?
Yes.
It's frustrating to say the least, and it's also horrific in terms of watching what's going on there. I mean, unless there's anything else that you think we should know. I mean, I don't, at least in on this, where we're at today.
No, I feel suitably horrible. I think we can move on.
Well, okay.
We've done our job.
My one quick question to you is, do you think that this has done significant damage to Israel's ability to deter people like Iran and Hezbollah, given the fact that they are so bogged down in Gaza right now?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think what we saw, I mean, it kind of goes both ways. I mean, what we saw a few weeks ago with and I think I came on and spoke to you guys about that, the Israeli attack in Damascus and then the Iranian counterattack and the kind of regional coalition that came together to defend against that. So I think that showed that there is a capacity, if Iran were to move to escalate like that. I don't think they're inclined to do that. And we've seen Hezbollah continue to harass and fire rockets and essentially depopulate Israel's north. I don't think they're inclined to go big, at least not yet. I think they are succeeding from their point of view with Israel and the U.S. continually and increasingly isolated in the world.
I had 2 more questions regarding that. The one being the Iran nuclear deal. I think we've spoken about this certainly in the past couple
going
of
back
years.
many years. Yes.
Yeah. Have you, and I think at the time we thought, like, this is a big missed opportunity for Biden.
Yes.
This is a failure of competence.
Yes.
Have you revisited your assessment of that in light of just how deep his ideological commitment seems to Israel? In other words, like, it certainly struck me as like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
Maybe there was an element of not necessarily wanting to make this deal that was a little bit stronger than I had presumed, based upon the way he's acting now regarding Israel.
I wouldn't say I've revisited it. I thought early on it was a huge mistake not to simply go quickly back into the deal. I continue to think that.
Well, I agree in terms of mistake, but like as far as I'm concerned, Iraq was a mistake. But if you ask Dick Cheney, he'll go, no, actually it wasn't, and it turned out pretty well as far as the things that I assess these things on. I mean, do you I guess was it a mistake from Biden's perspective to not get back into that deal?
I think their view is they waited. They made a strategic choice to wait a little bit to see if they could draw something out that was slightly bigger and stronger and longer, but that they did eventually make an effort. And I think it's true. I mean, Rob Malley, who was the special envoy for Iran, he's on leave right now. But there were several rounds of talks and reportedly were pretty close at various times. But again, by the time these talks really got serious, you were dealing with a much more hardline Iranian government. I think that's the opportunity that was lost by not going in early, is that you still essentially had the team that signed the deal with Obama back in 2015. And by the time Biden got serious about it, Iran was going into its elections, and so that team was no longer capable of cutting to a deal. So I think their view would be like, well, we tried, and Iran just wouldn't go for it, which is not entirely untrue. I think they would prefer that they had the deal. I think they would prefer, even though its timelines were much shorter, it still would have put a cap on the program, still would have had heavy inspections on the program versus what we have now, which is nothing.
Israel wasn't in favor of it, but
well, the Arab countries, the other Arab countries, what's the are you surprised that they still seem to be we're not hearing much? It seems to me from Jordan and in Egypt and Syria, for that matter. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm surprised. These are not very effective foreign policy actors. That's been part of the problem. I think we have seen some escalation in rhetoric, especially from the Saudi government, which I think used the word genocide recently for the first time. But they still are holding to the countries that have already joined the Abraham Accords, like the UAE, like Bahrain, and some others. The value of those relationships from their perspective, from the perspective of these repressive regimes, is still there. But I think the political cost, certainly for Saudi Arabia, that's kind of off the table for them right now. Certainly in the absence of any kind of remotely meaningful commitment on the Palestinian side.
All right, let's turn to Europe for a moment. The EU elections took place, and just will you explain to me that we have the national elections, which are on a different schedule, but the national parties then can also run for the EU Parliament, and those right-wing national parties, in many instances, outdid they did better in the EU elections than they are doing even domestically.
Right.
What's that dynamic?
Right. Let's know. First, they definitely made a strong showing they will be in the EU Parliament. The Parliament still contains a strong pro-Europe contingent, the majority. But no, the far right has certainly boosted its numbers. But there are some specific countries like Germany, like Austria, where the far right made a really strong showing here.
I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, when did that ever go bad? Italy, Meloni is now very strong. The far right there made a strong showing, but I think France is probably the biggest news. Le Pen's National Rally organization made such a strong showing that Macron was decided to call snap elections. And I saw that, and I started to have this horrible flashback because, if you think back to June 2016, there was an election that was called, or a referendum that really didn't augur well for what eventually happened in the U.S. elections.
You're speaking of Brexit?
I am speaking of Brexit. It was conceived by David Cameron as let's just hash this out and get this over with, and I'll demonstrate that actually I'm still in charge. And I see echoes of that here. Macron he called these elections, let's just deal with this challenge right now.
What is the theory? Okay, so now Macron sees the strength of Le Pen's party in terms of the EU Parliament, and so he thinks like, I better nip this in the bud. I mean, what is? I'm not even sure I understand the strategy behind it.
I mean, he feels that it's better to go sooner rather than later. Again, he has a read on his own politics that is, I would hope, better than mine. But again, we have some pretty good examples of where this didn't.
Well, politicians lose.
They do lose. They do lose. And as I said, they lost to an extraordinary degree with enormous consequences in June 2016. And I have a very bad feeling about this one, you know?
And also both in terms of the way that it augurs for Macron and for this country.
Right. I mean, these trends are not isolated. You know, they echo, and they certainly echo here. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, this has been great.
Yeah.
You could have brought a muffin basket.
Can we talk about Menendez? I mean, can we end up?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
We can talk
okay.
about
No, I don't want to take control of your show. But
No,
I was
but
gonna
please
say,
do. Let's.
Can I ask you quickly though about India
Okay.
though? That's one thing
That's
that
kind of better news. Yeah,
better news.
Good idea. Good
yeah,
idea.
and
Let's
on
go with
better
this.
news.
Let's go with this. Yeah.
Like so, Narendra Modi's party did not have the gains, is my understanding, that they, the BJP, that they traditionally, or that would have been good for him. He's still in power,
Right.
but significantly weakened. Just quickly, what is your assessment of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I believe for the first time he will have to work effectively in coalition.
Oh.
So this is important. I mean, I think clearly he and his party felt that they had the wind at their backs and would just continue forward with their very ultra-right nationalist agenda. But this appears to have put some brakes on that.
Why can't India be our leading indicator?
You know, maybe it will be. I'm going to go with that.
Yes.
Again.
All right,
Emma,
thank
thank you for
You're
bringing us to
welcome.
this, yeah.
Although Menendez, also fun news, so we can get into that too.
That's an evergreen. So anytime you want.
They found so much cash in this guy's house.
Cash and cars.
Yeah. Gold bars and cars now. Mercedes. Yeah.
Cash, gold
Right.
bars, and Mercedes.
Yeah.
I mean,
A humble public servant.
Yeah.
I'm sure this. I mean, but to
You're
be
playing
fair,
the game called capitalism.
He did come from Cuba, so that's the reason, right? Why he's keeping all that stuff in his house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
It's
can't
just-
trust the banks here.
Right. No, he appears to be sticking with that one. No, there was that story that came out last week, which I don't know why I'm obsessed with, but that his own lawyer confessed, I forget what the context was, that he eats at Morton's Steakhouse 250 nights a year.
Oh, I did not hear that.
Jesus,
Which-
that's a lot of red meat.
I don't know.
Well, they have seafood
emergency
there, don't they?
message from Bob Menendez's colon. You know, help me.
That's right.
I'm worried about him and getting the Jordan Peterson psychosis.
Yeah.
Well, they also give you a 10% discount on cash when you pay in cash.
Ding.
There you go. So that's probably it. I would imagine he's had like a lot of work done on his house, right? Like that's like a big contractor.
Oh,
thing
yeah.
with the cash thing. Matt Duss. I mean, I want to say always a pleasure,
Thank you. For me too.
but it's usually mixed with what you have to talk about.
Yeah. No. I will note some better news for next time. I'll make
All
it
right,
my
we'll work on it.
project.
Yeah. Where can folks see? I mean, are you regularly writing anywhere, or is it you had this piece in
MSNBC last week.
MSNBC last week?
Yeah, I publish in the New Republic pretty regularly. But check my work out and the work of our team at the Center for International Policy.
All right, we will put a link to that in our podcast and YouTube descriptions. Matt Duss, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks a lot.
With an asterisk.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.